Commutify presents Between the Lines with Andy Keaton. Each week, we explore the challenging issues transportation demand management professionals face on their journey to transition commuters from driving alone to more sustainable, shared, and active commuting habits. Be sure to subscribe to hear next week's episode and check out our exclusive commuter playlists on Spotify. This is Between the Lines with Andy Keaton.
Hi, everyone, and welcome aboard to this week's Between the Lines podcast. Today, I am joined by Johnny Simkin. Johnny is the co-founder and CEO of Swiftly, a mobility operating system that empowers mass transit agencies to provide more efficient, reliable, and seamless transportation. Today, over 100 cities and 7,000 transit professionals use Swiftly to improve transportation for nearly 2 billion passenger trips per year, which is great. We're really excited to be talking, obviously, about transportation. And prior to founding Swiftly, Johnny's also been around the block a bit in the tech world as the director of product at Rafter Inc. and the co-founder and CEO of Hub EDU Inc. And in his spare time, he enjoys hockey, ping pong, tennis, and coffee. All great things, I would say. Thanks for being on today, Johnny.
Thanks for having me, Andy.
And today we're talking about, I guess it might be obvious to our listeners, we're talking about public transit, but specifically we're talking about public transit data and how it will help save the planet. So maybe to frame things off, can you tell us what is Swiftly and how do you work with transit data?
Great question. So, at Swiftly, we consider ourselves to be really the first big data platform for public transportation. We take a wide variety of data sets as inputs, and really what we're trying to do is drive safe, efficient, and reliable transit. So we have three core product lines. The first is called Transit Time, and that's all around generating more accurate ETAs and information for riders. So we power the real-time data that goes into apps like Transit or Google Maps. If you've ever opened any application, you see the next bus arrives in 5 minutes. In the cities that we work in, we power that data. And the reason why that's important is we can improve the accuracy by up to 30%. So it has a huge impact on the overall rider experience. And then we have a whole suite of back-end tools for the agency to analyze anything around service performance or reliability, and then operational tools to actually drive more efficient and reliable service.
That's great, and actually a good segue as well to next week. Our guest is actually from Transit, as you mentioned. So it'll be a good, I think, tie-in because we're talking today about transit data from the operator perspective more, and then next week we'll be talking a little bit more about now. Okay, great, you have all this data. How do we show it to people? So everyone listening or watching, tune in to both these. I think they'll tie in well. So I think this is really interesting. A 30% increase in accuracy is pretty cool. So can we talk a little bit more about where exactly in the public transportation space data actually plays a role? Is this in planning transportation routes? You mentioned operations, a little bit with rider experience. Where really does this data play?
So the answer is actually a bit of everywhere. And I think that was one of our big realizations when we started the company. Most of the transit agencies and operators in not just the US, but the world, typically rely on systems that were built 20 to 40 years ago. They're on-prem. They don't necessarily have the capability of storing or analyzing large data sets. And in fact, they were built before big data and cloud computation were even keywords that we talk about. And so agencies have a wide variety of disparate data sets today. A lot of analysis happens in Excel. A lot of it's paper and pencil. A lot of it is working with consultants. And one of the things that we found when we started the company is different departments within the agency have access to different data sets. They have access to different tools. And sometimes they come to different conclusions when they're looking at the same thing. And the result is that you don't have a well-unified vision of what's actually happening in the network, what might be causing inefficiencies or poor service reliability. and how do we improve it. And so when we think about being a data platform for transportation, we write solutions really built for scale, so we can deploy them in hundreds of cities and impact billions of trips per year, but ones that are designed to drive consensus across the agency. So we have a whole suite of tools looking at historical data for planners to help them complete planning projects, typically 90% faster than they could otherwise. So completing them in only 10% of the time. We have tools for schedulers that look at real world distributions of travel times from every stop, from every trip, 24/7, to create optimized schedules based on all of these distributions that we observe. We've seen that improve on-time performance by 5 to 7%. Just that one module improve on-time performance by 5 to 7%. Um, and then we write algorithms to process data in real time for riders to create more accurate ETAs. And one of the new things we launched this year is actually combining operational changes with ETAs. So, for example, let's say there's a detour. You can now draw that as an operations team within Swiftly, draw the detour. We have an application that sits in front of the vehicle operator, the driver. So we'll route the driver around the detour and simultaneously update ETAs that go into every app and cancel any stop that the bus is no longer or train will no longer serve. So when you start to combine the data that every stakeholder might interface with and you apply some more sophisticated algorithms on top of it, you can drive tremendous efficiency and really improve the rider experience. And that's one of the things we're heavily focused on.
This is really cool. So really the key here is you're unifying maybe some previously disparate data set into one platform, but you're helping kind of everyone along the way. I thought that was an interesting idea, particularly the last one you mentioned. We're helping the driver navigate the streets around construction, but we're also helping the rider understand that this is how it's changing my, expected, arrival time. So that's really cool. I wonder then, who is it that is actually using the platform, right? Like, who is it that says, okay, we have a problem, we need something, Swiftly has the answer for us? And how do you then, actually make it easier for these people to access their data that they probably already maybe had, but didn't know how to access it?
Yeah. It's so, I mean, I always say agencies are data rich and information poor. There, as you said, there's a lot of data from a lot of disparate systems that different people are using in different ways. When you try to take raw data, for example, let's just say GPS, right? You have a latitude and longitude of a bus. Not particularly useful data, but there's a lot of it because
Sure.
you're hopefully getting a lot of GPS from your fleet. How do you then turn that into useful information to make smarter decisions? Well, that's where you have to apply logic, algorithms, things of that sort on top of the data. So one of the things that we do is we not only ingest a lot of data from disparate sources and have it in one central place, but we turn it into useful information for different stakeholders. In a given agency, if it's a medium or large agency, we might have 200 to 500 different staff members logging into Swiftly from different departments for different types of problems or challenges they're trying to solve. So to the agency side, we have it's a modern web-based portal where you can log in and access a wide variety of different pieces of information. You can look at the on-time performance of the network. You can look at maybe what stops are causing delays. You can run optimizations to build new schedules. You can create heat maps of the city to figure out what intersections or specific corridors of the road are causing delays. Now, before Swiftly, you would hire typically a consultant to do a 1 to 2 year study to capture a lot of data, to analyze it, and then try to figure out what routes are running slow or what corridors are causing delays. We've now turned that into about 500 milliseconds. You press a button, visualizes the network. You can see exactly what intersection is causing the delay. That's just the planner. That's one of many typical planning use cases. We touch scheduling, customer service too. A large agency might get 5,000 calls per day from riders saying, where's my bus? When's it going to arrive? I left my wallet on this bus, but I don't remember what was there. I was at this location at this time. So we have tools that help customer service teams answer those calls typically in about 10 to 20% of the amount of time it used to take them. And so what's interesting is we take a lot of data in, but then we process it, we turn it into useful information, and we create really easy to use interfaces that anyone at the agency can access to be able to make their lives better every day. And then the end result is riders ultimately get a much better experience. On-time performance goes up, service reliability goes up, and then of course we talked about ETA accuracy that we can send to transit or other apps. We tend to find with our algorithms that is a significant improvement. So really the whole goal is to make public transit easy, reliable, and hopefully preferred mode to get from A to B.
This is one of the reasons I love having this podcast and talking to people like you, because when we talk broadly about, this whole TDM multimodal solution out there, public transit is obviously a key player in it. You think, okay, it's complex enough. We have to think about public transit and bikes and car share and ride share, whatever it is that you want to throw into the mix. But then if you just go into one of those in public transit, and the listeners on here who are part of public transit agencies and are operators themselves understand the complexity. Other people might not get, like, how many different users did you say at a single agency might use?
Oh, we have some agencies with more than 500 staff members using Swiftly for a wide variety of use cases and applications.
That's crazy. So yeah, and this points to the value of data. 500 people can access data now in a way that helps them do their job at a single agency. That's pretty cool. I'm really impressed by this whole story. It's really interesting. So this is good. We framed the idea. Data is important. If you didn't believe it now, you should believe it. It's important to the whole entire operation of the whole system. So what does this actually do? And you mentioned, like, there's a lot of improvements with how people, or how transit's operated, or how people interact with it. But how does this then help kind of the key number, which is ridership? I'm thinking, like, does this help get more people on transit and move them more efficiently?
Great question. Well, I'll share maybe a few stats from pre-pandemic. The pandemic obviously blew up
Sure.
ridership in many different ways in different cities. But going back to 2019, before the pandemic started, there were actually only 7 agencies in the US that were experiencing increased ridership. 4 of them happened to be partners of Swiftly.
Oh, there you go. That's pretty good.
I can't necessarily, it's hard to know exactly how they were growing ridership. We're one small piece of many things that these agencies are doing, but over half the agencies with increasing ridership in the US were Swiftly customers. And what we find is that they tend to adopt Swiftly for a wide variety of different applications. And as you start to increase the reliability and efficiency of the network, as well as the passenger information quality, those things have compounding effects. So I'll walk you through a few examples. In one of the cities that we're working with, they're using our runtime suggestions, which is looking at those distributions of how long does it actually take to travel from stop to stop. Sometimes agencies, ride the bus with a clipboard and they'll write down how long it takes, and they build schedules off that. There's a better way, and you can actually, we can optimize the exact network because we're tracking it 24/7 every few seconds from every vehicle. So just by optimizing those schedule times, we've seen improvements in on-time performance by 5 to 7%. We launched a case, or we released a case study about a month ago in Washington, D.C., for example, in the U.S. They saw on-time performance improvements of over 6%.
Wow.
Just by using optimized runtimes. In addition to that, you think about different planning use cases, designing better streets, thinking about where you should be placing bus stops. Is it on the near side or far side of an intersection? All of those small tweaks can have huge impacts to on-time performance. You think about ETA accuracy. If we're able to improve the quality of the ETAs for riders, that's going to make it so that they can trust and rely on the information they're getting, and then they're more likely to take transit. and then even Onboard app, which is our Android application or iOS application that can just be placed right in front of the driver. Um, Drivers have always had this information in front of them. It's just never really been usable. And so we did a few studies where we placed next to a legacy, 15, 20-year-old, they call them MDTs, where it was giving the driver feedback. And then we placed our just simple iOS, Android application in front of the same driver. And we saw that on-time performance improved by 5 to 7% again. And we saw a reduction in early departures by 35 to 55%. And that's the worst scenario for the rider, where the vehicle leaves early because you get there on time, it just left, and you're waiting the maximum
You're seeing it going and you're like chasing it down. Yeah.
Exactly. So now you think about improving the operational reliability from the operator side, the driver side. You think about more accurate schedules, streets that are being designed around facilitating smooth transit, and then ETAs for riders that reflect what's really happening in real time. So if you're doing detours or canceling trips or adding trips, that's all factored into those ETAs. Those things have a huge implication end to end. And I think that's one of the ways that we've been really successful as far as improving ridership, the rider experience, and then ultimately increasing ridership.
And I think we've talked about this in previous episodes, and we'll likely talk about it again in next week's episode. We're talking with transit is the importance of kind of on time arrivals for buses is it's just like people something like overestimate the wait time when they're waiting at a stop by like 2 or 3 times. And so if you expect, the bus is going to be here at 8:30 and then it's 8:40, it feels to you like it was 20 minutes late when it was 10 minutes late. It'd be nice to just be able to know that it's going to be there at 8:40, but B, that it just actually gets there closer to 8:30. So I love that there's multiple different things in the data space that can help get you closer to, let's just get there at 8:30 every time. That's really interesting. And it all comes from the data that already exists. It's already out there. It's just using it better is what it sounds like you're saying.
It does exist. It's normally from very different systems that don't talk to one another. And so it's non-trivial just to gather these multiple different data sets. But oftentimes it does exist. And then sometimes we create our own data too when we need to, especially with the application that sits in front of the driver that ensures we have good GPS as well. But no, what you said is so true. And it's really interesting for me because I actually did not know anything about transportation going back about 8 years ago. I sold my car. I moved to San Francisco, started taking public transit. I'm like, oh, why did I keep missing the bus? Like, why is this app giving me wrong data? And then to your point around when you start to peel away layers of the onion, these are really complex networks with really challenging problems to solve. And so it's been quite a journey, but so much fun. And I think we're just getting started.
Yeah, public transit is probably to jump in somewhere in transportation. You jumped into a complex one, but this sounds great. So, can we talk a little bit then about the environmental benefits of this? I know, before we got on, we were talking a bit. You were throwing out some numbers that we can see from people taking more transit. Do you want to just tell us what could the environmental benefits be that we see from increased ridership? Hopefully it's coming from more data usage. What does that look like?
Yeah, well, I can at least speak for some stats in the US where I tend to follow it a little bit more closely. But in the US, the transportation sector is about a third of greenhouse gas emissions, just under 30%. And one of the largest, and by the way, transportation in general is the largest single contributor to greenhouse gas emissions over any other sector too. So it's really important. And then when you look within the transportation sector, moving people is one of the largest contributors within that. So if we think about how to drive environmental impact, a big piece of that is not having people in cars that are using gasoline to get from A to B, and ideally combining multiple people in a single vehicle for a trip so that you're sharing the environmental impact from that trip, and also reducing congestion along the way, which is a huge other contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. So general stat in the US at least, public transit saves about 37 million metric tons of CO2 annually. And to put that in perspective, that's for about the electricity consumed by 4.9 million households. So that's every household in Washington, D.C., New York City, Atlanta, Denver, and LA combined. So it's pretty significant.
Yeah, no, that's an amazing stat. I don't know how I haven't heard that before, because that was well put together. And if we're talking, we talk about data and we say you're increasing, on-time arrival by 6% here and 8% here, and making it easier to use it. And hopefully that, even if it only meant 1% more usage, we're seeing huge environmental benefits from that. That's really cool. Okay, so this is your time to shine. All right, we're on to the final question. And you just hit on a couple of these things, but like we do every episode, let's kind of summarize this. What's that key point for that key takeaway for our listeners? Why will public transit data help save the planet?
Well, I think it's a great question. I think it goes very much to what I just talked about. Transportation is almost a third of greenhouse gas emissions in the country. Public transit is one of the most efficient and reliable ways to reduce that impact, because we're getting people out of their single occupancy vehicles, shifting them actually to more electric modes as transit fleets are electrified as well. And if you were to look at the largest contributors, getting people out of their passenger cars into shared mobility that with electric fleets, that's where you're going to have a huge environmental impact. One other thing I'm going to add too is the environment is obviously essential. So is the economy. Every dollar invested in public transit, it has about $3 of local economic returns. So as we're thinking about recovering from the pandemic, the environment is a huge aspect of that, and so is rebuilding our local economies. And so I think public transit is just essential to thinking about the future.
This is another thing I like about this podcast is almost every time we're talking about the environmental benefits, there's always like the caveat. Well, it also helps with something, economic. I hadn't heard that stat either about actually help. Like, that's really cool that we can help, rebuild, the economy, build back better, as the Biden administration likes to say, I guess, via public transportation. It's really cool. Well, Johnny, this has been a great conversation. I have one more question for you, so don't go anywhere. But to all of our listeners and to our viewers, thanks again for joining us. Make sure that you like, subscribe, give us a follow, give us a rating. Whatever you can do, it helps. If you haven't yet checked out the video, we post all of these podcasts as videos. Just a little different flair, look like you're doing something at work, because you're learning new things. Check us out. You can find the video. You can also subscribe to our email list, where we send out some additional information each week at betweenthelines.io. All right, Johnny, our final question. As our more loyal listeners might already know, we have been building a playlist on Spotify with music for everyone's commutes to work that they can listen to, and we're filling that with our guest favorite songs. What would you like to add?
I would love to add "Here Comes the Sun" by the Beatles. It's very sentimental. It always makes me happy, and it's what my wife walked down the aisle to. So it brings a nice sunlight to my day every day.
I love it, and it's a great song. You can't have a good playlist without that song. I feel like a good start to the day, certainly.
Yeah.
All right, Johnny. Thanks again for being on, and everyone listening and watching. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.
All right, we'll see you all next week.
Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of Between the Lines with Andy Keaton. Be sure to subscribe to hear next week's episode, and check out our exclusive commuter playlists on Spotify.